Life is just Tracy. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. Today we're going to be talking about sideboarding in Modern. And yes, I'm taking a break from Modern, but I still played the format for a while and I still know how the format works and things like that. And I really want to talk to you guys about sideboarding because I was actually inspired by talking to John, because he's like really good at sideboarding and like he does a lot of things that I wish that, you know, like when I started out in the format, that I wish people like talk to me about like how to sideboard better. So that's why I'm doing this video, to hopefully help you guys like sideboard a little bit better. And basically, I think one major thing about sideboarding that I think I really wish I knew is that your sideboard is constantly going to change, and that's okay. So let's take, for example, when Twin was in the format. When Twin was in the format and I was playing Grixis Control, I had Rending Volleys in my sideboard because that card's really, really good against Pestermite and Deceive Rexart. Rending Volley, it's 1 mana, it can't be countered, and it's an instant, and it deals 4 damage to target red or blue creature. It's really, really good. It's really good against Twin. It was a really good card in a sideboard that you just play against Twin, and they just really couldn't respond because Twin ran counterspells. And when that went out of the meta, because it got banned, that card in my sideboard was really useless. So I was like, well, I don't really need to run this card anymore because it only really was for like that one matchup, and it's just not really doing anything too much to me. Like it's just not really helping. So I took it out. And that was the thing that, you know, when the meta shifted, your deck shifted, your sideboard shifted as well. And that's really important. And like how it's okay to like take cards out and change your sideboard for different metas. So if you're going to a huge tournament, say you're going to like an open or something, or a tournament that's like, you know, not like your local game store, you're going to build your sideboard differently, or you should build your sideboard differently compared to if you're playing at your local game store. Say your local game store you're playing Elves. I don't know, first I could think of. You're playing Elves, and you know that at your local game store, you see a lot of Burn players. Burn's like not really in the meta right now, but say your local game store, there's a ton of Burn players. You build your sideboard and you make that so your deck is better against that deck. But then say you're going to, you know, a big tournament, there's going to be probably a variety of decks, and you're going to want to make sure your sideboard has a lot of cards fit for that. Another thing I'd say about sideboard that I think is really important is I am not a huge fan of this, and I know there's some people who are like, they run 4 ofs in their sideboard, and I'm like heavily really against this. Here's why. I feel like when you have like 4 cards in your sideboard, unless it's good against like 50% of the matchups, which I mean, I can't really even think of cards that are like good against so many of that you're going to bring in for a lot of matchups, it really shouldn't be a 4 of in your sideboard. At most I could see it was 3. And there are some cards where you really do need 3 because you really do want those cards to be shown. You really want them to show up. So like cards like that are like Stony Silence. If you're playing this against like some versions of Tron and what's the other, Affinity, or say you run a card like Blood Moon or like Rest in Peace. Those are cards that you want, like you don't want to just have a 1 of in your sideboard. You want to have like at least 2, maybe 3, especially if you have like draw discard outlets, if you're playing like a control strategy or something like that. Those cards are like really good to have like 2, 3 of, and I think like that's a huge thing, is like finding your balance of like how many of these cards do I need? How often do I want them to basically show up? And a lot of it is like, how much am I drawing in my deck? Because if you're drawing like quite a bit of cards, maybe you don't necessarily need like 3 copies of something because you're drawing a lot and you're discarding a lot. So if you happen to draw like, let's be real, it's always been awkward if you have like Stony Silence and you draw another one and you're like, well, I don't really need another one, and you know your opponent has no way of removing it. Or if they do try to remove it, you have a counterspell for it, or like whatever. So yeah, that's really important with like numbers. And I think just being really flexible. I think sideboarding is all about being flexible, and it's all about like being willing to change it, and that's okay. And taking cards in and taking cards out and figuring out your numbers. And like figuring out, like a massive thing I think is figuring out which matchups are really bad for you and which matchups that, like, there's sometimes where like you only sideboard in like one card or two cards or something. Okay, this is a huge, huge thing that I do in sideboarding that a lot of people would argue against. A lot of times, if I'm playing, especially like a control strategy, like I said, when I'm drawing a lot of cards, I actually savagely a lot of times run 61 or 62 cards. Now, a lot of people are like, wait, that's weird. You only really want to run 60 cards. And for the most part, yes, I would agree with you. Main board, 100% 60 cards for me, like, all the time. But when it comes to, like, sideboard, like, games 2 and 3, a lot of times, I have a really difficult time picking which cards come out. I'm really bad at that. I'm really, really awful. I don't know if I'll ever get to a point where I'm good at it. I'm like, I don't know what cards to take out of this matchup, but you have a lot of cards that you want to bring in, and if you are really struggling to, like, get it down, but you're like, I need to take out one card, but I don't know what it is, run 61 cards. Do it. Like, see how it feels for you. You're really not going to notice, like, that much of a difference because it's one card. You have, like, two opinions, I would think. Some people would be like, it's one card, it makes a difference. Some people would be like, it's one card, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I do it all the time. All the time. I am like, I don't know what else to take out, and I run more than 60. And I think that's okay. And I think, like, that's a huge thing that I think a lot of people, like, it doesn't work all the time, and sometimes you just don't need to. Absolutely. Sometimes you're like, yo, these cards are really bad. Take them out, and these cards come in. But, I don't know. I think it's about being flexible, like I said. That's, like, a huge part of sideboarding, and make sure you're catering your sideboard to different metas and different things of what you're playing. And like, where to get sideboard cards from is, you know, once you figure out, like, your bad matchups and cards that you, like, really want to put in, is figure out, like, what cards are really good against those matchups. Like, there's some cards that are just, like, a staple that are really good, like Crumble to Dust is, like, really good against Tron. Really good. It's pretty good against, Affinity. If you can stall Affinity out and get to turn 4, Crumble to Dust is really good because you can get rid of their Inkmoth Nexus or their, Blinkmoth Nexus. It's mostly really good against Tron. Yeah, it's really good. And, like, just say, like, a deck like Jund, because you can get rid of the Raging Ravine. Crumble Dust is a really good card in my opinion that I like for a variety of different decks. I brought it in against Affinity before and just savaged them because I Crumble to Dust and the next turn Snapcaster Crumble to Dust, got rid of Blinkmoth and Inkmoth Nexus, and they just couldn't do anything. Tron it's super good against. I don't know, I just like it against a variety of decks. I think it's really good against, like, manlands. Yeah, and, like, how I find cards is I go back from old Modern decks. Like, I think this is an important thing, is, like, I always keep my decks, even if I don't play them anymore, like, they're still on my tapped out. Like, you can find decks, and so it's so weird. Some people comment on my decks and give me advice, and I'm like, I don't even play that deck anymore. But the reason why I keep them up is that I can look back at those and a lot of times check sideboard so that I'd be like, what did I run in the sideboard? I was running green. Okay, cool. What green cards can I run? You know, so I can keep track of a lot of times, like, what I was doing in my sideboard. That's, like, really important, and if you guys keep track of your decks, which I definitely think you should, especially if your deck changes, and you can keep track and be like, okay, what did I decide to do in this deck? What did I decide to change? I think that's really cool. And, like, a lot of times too, you know, like, if you have, like, you know, like, access to have, like, a binder of, like, cards that you can trade in and out, even if you can't do that, like, to build, like, a bunch of Modern decks, if you can just do that for, like, sideboard cards, a lot of times, like, sideboard cards aren't, like, that expensive, I feel, except for, like, Blood Moon is, like, really expensive. But, like, you know, a lot of times, like, the sideboard cards are, like, usually on the cheaper side. You can, like, make a sideboard, I think that's, like, cheaper. That's how I mostly feel, I think. Yeah. But yeah, be flexible. That's, like, the big thing I would say with sideboarding, is just be flexible and be willing to change it, because your deck is going to be good or bad in certain metas with what everyone is playing. And bad matchups are, like, a huge thing that you want to try to make as best as you can with your sideboard. Like, that's what it's there for, really, is this matchup isn't good. How can I make my matchup a little bit better? And let's be real here, a lot of times bad matchups are just bad. It just happens. It's the way that it goes. Alright, yeah, guys, that was it. That was it for sideboarding. Let me know your favorite sideboard cards. I said in a video recently, like, Pithing Needle is, like, my number one, like, one of my all-time favorite sideboard cards, and I really like Crumble to Dust, too. That's, like, really all great. Slaughter Games, I like that card, too. That's it. I'll talk to you guys later.